Hello, my name's Chris Putnam. It's my pleasure to present to you on astrobiology and the Vatican ET connection. Now, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics, and I also have a master's degree in theology. But I've also had a long-running interest in the UFO phenomenon, at least back into the early 70s. In fact, I still have a scrapbook of UFO newspaper articles beginning with the Pascagoula, Mississippi case in 1973. So this unconventional range of interest kind of came to fruition in this book. This is the book I co-authored with Thomas Horn, Exo Vaticana. And you might notice the subtitle, The Vatican's Astonishing Plan for the Arrival of an Alien Savior. Now, I suspect that sounds pretty sensational to many of you. So I'm going to unpack throughout the course of this presentation, what we mean by that. And I'm sure many of you are curious about the book's cover. Perhaps you're wondering if that's just creative license. But actually, something very much like the cover of the book was documented by the Mutual UFO Network and even the New York Times. Now, for Roman Catholics, the year 1978 will long be remembered as the year of three popes. Pope Paul VI died on August 6, 1978. Then Pope John Paul I was elected, but only lived 63 days. And many claim he was actually murdered. Then in October, John Paul II was elected and became the famous pope that many of us probably remember. But what you might not know is that this spiritually charged period of time also marked an unprecedented level of UFO activity over Rome. Within the midst of the doomed pontificate of John Paul I's brief reign, numerous cigar, disc, and triangular-shaped craft were seen haunting the skies across Italy by people of all walks of life, including Vatican officials. Now, according to the Mutual UFO Network, at 5:50 a.m. on September 14th, people in Rome saw a triangular object for 5 minutes. At about the same time, people near Florence reported seeing a cigar-shaped object. Early on the morning of the 16th, highway police near Rome received calls about a luminous triangle and a beam of greenish light. Now, the early morning triangular craft sighting on September 14th in Rome was reported by police, Vatican guards, and airline workers. Now, the purpose and effect of the green light is still unknown, but 2 fishermen actually went missing, and I can't find any record of them ever being found. Now, as the third pope within the calendar year took office, UFOs grew more invasive, so much so that the story made the New York Times. Now, the slide that you're looking at is a clipping from the New York Times news service in December of 1978. Dozens of persons witnessed and photographed a strange donut-shaped craft emitting a beam of green light above Rome on December 14, 1978. Now, according to the article, Rome's police department corroborated the UFO sighting, and more disturbing, these 2 fishermen from a nearby village disappeared and their fate is unknown. The unprecedented level of UFO activity over Rome, coinciding with the infamous year of 3 popes, at a minimum, suggests that there's something really interesting going on. Many in ufology have noticed that the Vatican has an uncanny interest in the UFO phenomenon and extraterrestrial life. Now, in 2012, the book After Disclosure, when the government finally reveals the truth about alien contact, Richard Dolan and Bruce Zabel wrote concerning Roman Catholicism. The world's largest church seems to be positioning itself at the forefront of disclosure. The Vatican has long maintained several major astronomical observatories and a collection of radio telescopes. In recent years, its hierarchy has stated, in one form or another, that we have company. Perhaps they know something is afoot or suspect its inevitability, end quote. So there is a wealth of evidence suggesting this conclusion that these 2 UFO researchers came to. Now, do they know something we do not know? Well, we're looking at the oldest bureaucracy in history. It has 1,214 million followers. Within that, we have highly placed worldwide insiders, secret societies, including the Jesuits, Knights of Columbus, Knights of Malta, Opus Dei. Now, on top of all this global infrastructure, they do maintain a state-of-the-art observatory, which we'll get to later. Of course, it's widely known that Roman Catholicism conducts investigations of the supernatural and anomalous phenomenon, miracles, apparitions, and it even interacts with non-human intelligences via exorcism. But Roman Catholicism is also famously associated with many unidentified aerial phenomenon, abbreviated UAP. The miracle of the sun was an unidentified aerial phenomenon witnessed on October 13, 1917, by up to 100,000 people gathered near Fatima, Portugal. Here's a 1917 newspaper with a photo of the crowd looking up at the sky. Now here's another photo of a large crowd gathered at Fatima. Several newspaper reporters in attendance recorded the testimony from people who claimed to have witnessed an extraordinary aerial phenomenon in which a silvery disk flew about in the sky. Now, of course, this was long before the term flying saucer was coined, and many thought the disk was the sun. Also, because it had been raining and the clouds had just broken out as the phenomenon occurred, many believed it was a solar miracle. However, if the sun had actually moved in the described manner, the gravitational effects would have devastated the Earth. Even so, the sighting was officially declared a miracle by the Roman Catholic Church in 1930. Now here's some descriptions from various eyewitnesses, accounts recording in a book called Heavenly Lights, The Apparitions of Fatima and the UFO Phenomenon by Joaquim Fernandez. Now here's a quote from a religious periodical. It says, "Suddenly a luminous disk, the size of a great host, but one which could be gazed upon as one gazes at the moon, appeared, as if it stood out from the sun, descending visibly." Here's Mario Gahino, an engineer, described it as a disk of polished glass illuminated from behind. And he used terms like a majestic disk. Again, Gilbert dos Santos, the sun is described as a dull silver disk. Maria Romana, the sun gave the appearance of a globe of dull silver fire surrounded by a very dark purplish disk. Now, more eyewitness reports could be cited, but I think the point has been made. The official version of the story was packaged in the religious terminology, specifically Catholic dogma, of the day. However, based on multiple descriptions of a silver disk and a sun that did not have the blinding qualities of the sun, it appears that the eyewitness accounts above that people were looking at was a craft of some sort. I believe that if you or I were to somehow transport ourselves back to 1917 in Fatima or Portugal, we'd point to the sky and say, "Look at that, a UFO." Now here's the only known photograph of the alleged miracle of the sun. Now what I've done is I've zoomed in on this dark disk that's in the sky so you can sort of get an idea of what we're looking at. Here's a cropped up close-up of the disk, or perhaps a globe. Now I don't think this is a picture of the sun. The sun is a blinding fireball, not a dull gray globe. So why is the sun supposedly dark gray in this black and white photo? Obviously, we're not looking at the sun. Now, many scholars are now categorizing Fatima as a mass UFO sighting. A Portuguese university history professor, Joaquim Fernandez, assembled an international panel to subject the Fatima apparitions to the scrutiny of modern scientific analysis. In his book, Fatima Revisited, 2008, Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis discussed the psycho-spiritual nature of the UFO phenomenon and assert Fatima as a representative case. As one example among many, it will be recalled that the events at Fatima involved luminous phenomena, atmospheric and thermal effects, and descriptions of an apparently metallic disk in the sky, while many of the 70,000 witnesses also experienced spiritual and psychological effects. Now, interestingly, as we go back to this outline, do they know something we don't know? We've already seen, they had this huge miracle at Fatima, Portugal, involving a gray disk in the sky, something that's become really just a trademark of modern Roman Catholic prophetic interest. Now, Pope Pius XII, who was the famous pope during World War II, actually witnessed this same phenomenon over the Vatican gardens in Rome 33 years later in 1950. A note signed by Pope Pius XII states that on October 31st, 1950, the sun, which was quite high and looked like a pale opaque sphere entirely surrounded by a luminous circle, end quote. Now, the disc-shaped object that he mentions, quote, moved outward slightly, either spinning or moving from left to right and vice versa. But within the sphere, you could see marked movements with total clarity and without interruption, end quote. Now, this is the sort of unidentified aerial phenomenon associated with Mary. However, that's quite astonishing because it really doesn't seem to have any connection to Mary within itself. But this is the Pope who actually approved the Fatima apparitions in 1940. And then he consecrated the entire world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary 2 years later. Now, more provocative is that he saw this spinning spherical anomaly on the day he defined the dogma of the Assumption of Mary, the Catholic belief that Mary ascended bodily into heaven. So quite literally, we can make a case that official Catholic dogma was dictated to him by a UFO. Back to our outline. Do they know something we don't know? Well, we've seen that they've seen a miracle of the sun that seems to be a UFO sighting. Pope Pius XII sees this opaque sphere over Rome. And now we get to the Vatican Observatory Research Group, acronym VORG. Now, it's not at all controversial to say that the Vatican is looking for ET. In 2009, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences hosted an astrobiology study week on the Vatican grounds from November 6th to the 11th. Now, the Pope's Academy gathered over 30 astronomers, biologists, geologists, as well as Catholic theologians to discuss the existence of extraterrestrials and the theological implications of disclosure. Welcoming perspectives from atheists, New Agers, Buddhists, and Catholics alike, the conference primarily focused on the scientific disciplines investigating the existence of extraterrestrial life and making contact.
For the Church, talking about life on other planets is not an everyday occurrence. But that was the theme at a week-long meeting that gathered scientists and theologians in the Vatican. The purpose of the meeting centered around astrobiology and the possibility that life exists elsewhere in the universe.
In this week, we've had a possibility to interact with our colleagues and try to answer questions like, will we find life in our solar system through space exploration or big telescopes? And will we get signs of biosignatures of life in the extrasolar planets that we have 400 of them out there today?
These planets have an atmosphere that can be similar to the atmosphere on Earth and have what we call biomarkers. So those elements that help to the development of life.
Scientists believe that by comparing our own planet's atmosphere to those of planets outside our solar system, they can get closer to understanding the possibility of life on other planets. The participants agreed that science and faith are not incompatible, and that both sides should continue working together in approaching this relatively new scientific field.
This dialogue and the scientists bringing that information from their research is occurring in the Pope's home. It's occurring in the heart of the Catholic Church. That is the receptivity to the information that is really the most important thing.
Professor Chris Impey from the University of Arizona was among the scientists involved in the week-long meeting and said that bringing together different perspectives contributes to a positive dialogue on astrobiology.
What was most important was it's still rare to have scientists from so many different perspectives and disciplines, intensively for a week sharing their opinions. And you could see that as people were getting ready to leave the meeting, they were still digesting the views of other scientists.
Scientists have not gathered any concrete proof that life exists elsewhere other than Earth. In fact, they admit that it may take years before the first sign of life on another planet is detected. But through meetings like this one, scientists and theologians have begun an important dialogue in understanding the young study of astrobiology.
And so here we have a headline: the Vatican prepares for extraterrestrial disclosure. Dr. Michael Salla of Exopolitics movement, he's concluded from this 2009 astrobiology conference that this really indicated the Vatican was preparing us for the big event of extraterrestrial disclosure. Now, at that event, there were some things that would suggest something like that. Cosmology and astrobiology education and outreach designate Dr. Chris Impey from the University of Arizona gave the keynote speech, stating it is plausibly estimated that there are hundreds of millions of habitable locations in the Milky Way, which is just one of billions of galaxies in the universe. As scientists gather to discuss the progress in astrobiology, we still know of only one planet with life, our own, but there is palpable expectation that the universe harbors life, and there is hope that the first discovery is only a few years away. Now that was in 2009. So by the time you're watching this video, those few years have certainly passed us by. But there have been some really major announcements concerning exoplanets. And that's really what's driving this idea that a major discovery is only a few years away. They're finding what they call Earth-like planets. Sometimes they use the word habitable even. We'll find out that those terms are kind of exaggerated, to say the least. Well, Dr. Impey's few years are now upon us. These exoplanet discoveries really do seem to offer some promise to what they're saying, because prior to 1995, there was no evidence for any planets whatsoever outside of our own solar system. Now, that has dramatically changed as scientists now estimate there are billions of planets. And now only maybe 1,706 such planets have been confirmed as of this week, but that's still a lot. Although the progress is remarkable, out of those, only 12 or so are classified as potentially habitable. Now, even so, that adjective habitable is really begging the question. What it actually denotes is that the planet resides in what they call the Goldilocks zone, meaning that it's not too hot and it's not too cold to hold liquid water. Now, this is crucial for the existence of life because if a planet's too hot, the water vaporizes into gas and the atoms really cannot join together to form molecules. And of course, if it's too cold, then you only have ice and not liquid water, and there's no life-sustaining chemical reactions that can occur. So here's an artist's conception that depicts Kepler 62e, a super-Earth planet, meaning it's 1.6 times the size of the Earth, and it's in the habitable zone of a star smaller and cooler than our Sun. And so for that reason, it orbits at an equivalent distance of Mercury. But because it's cooler, it has still within the Goldilocks zone. So it orbits its host star every 122 days. So they literally have a 122-day year. Now, a modeling study done by the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics suggests that Kepler 62e would have a very hospitable climate for life, as it would be damp in a warm environment, even up to the area around its poles. However, according to this modeling study, it's probably completely covered in water. So that would make civilization difficult to achieve, at least by our own understanding. It's located about 1,200 light years from Earth in the constellation Lyra. It was found using the transit method based on the dimming effect that a planet causes as it crosses in front of its star. So I think it's really important that we understand that they're not actually observing these planets. They're not firsthand looking at the planet. All this is done by modeling and other detection methods. So let's examine some of the methods of planet detection. The transit method, which I just discussed is how they found this planet, is used to detect the planet crossing directly in front of its star. Now, because stars really only amount to small points of light, this is detected when the brightness dips by just a few %. So a small dip in luminosity indicates that something has obscured the view. And that's really how they're finding a majority of these planets. The other method is called the wobble method. Now, it's a simple way to describe the planet's gravity tugging gravitationally as it orbits. So in reality, when something orbits, the planet and star are orbiting their common center of mass. But it's a large orbiting planet causes a noticeable wobble on the star. So this creates a detectable Doppler effect that the Kepler satellite or a sensitive telescope can detect. So again, they're not directly observing a planet, they're observing the effect of it going around the star. Now here's an artist's rendition of its neighbor to 62e. This is Kepler 62f, and it's in the foreground. And that little bright thing that you see over to the right is Kepler 62e that we just discovered. Now, it's more distant than 62e, and it would need the greenhouse effect to form plenty of carbon dioxide to make it warm enough to host an ocean. Otherwise, it really might be an ice-covered snowball. But it's another candidate they have listed as a potentially habitable planet. Now, just in the last couple weeks from when we've made this video, astronomers have made a major announcement that they have just discovered the first definitive Earth-sized planet that orbits in the habitable zone. Experts don't know if the planet actually has water or a protective atmosphere, but its size seems optimal. This is Kepler 186f. Now, what is driving these scientists to say that these planets are Earth-like or habitable? Is really more of a worldview issue, I've found, than a directly scientific conclusion. There are a lot of assumptions behind the science of astrobiology, because technically, if you think about it, we have astronomy, the study of space, and biology, the study of life. So we're talking about a science that reports to be the study of life in space. But technically, we've never found any life in space. So I find it a little interesting that you can get a PhD in a subject that absolutely has nothing at all to study as far as we know. But see, we live in a society that has elevated scientists to be the ultimate arbiters of truth. Now, this is an idea called scientism. But scientism is really a self-refuting idea. It's an idea that commits suicide because it doesn't meet its own standard for truth. Now, think about it. The idea that science is the only avenue to truth was not arrived at by the scientific method itself. Therefore, it doesn't meet its own standard, and it can't be true. So where did this all come from? Well, it kind of began back in what they call the Copernican Revolution. The Copernican Revolution displaced the Earth from the center of the cosmos. And they discovered that the sun was the center of our solar system. But it's really led to this idea that the Earth, there's nothing special about the position of the Earth. Now, that idea led to what is called the Copernican principle, and that is that we're not even in a special place in the universe. And from there, scientists have extrapolated much further to an idea that the Earth is just a mediocre planet amongst many, probably similar life-supporting planets. And this is called the principle of mediocrity. And it's based on the idea that, if you select something from two groups of things, you have, a large group of things, and you have a small group of things, and you just pick one at random, well, the chances are that what you have came from the large group. So based on that, they argue that the Earth being a life-supported planet is likely from a larger group of life-supporting planets. But see, that's an assumption that's really not based on anything factual because they don't know that there are many life-supporting planets. They're just assuming that. It's really circular reasoning. But the principle of mediocrity is widely accepted in astronomy and in astrobiology in particular. When you add to that the assumptions of abiogenesis, the idea that life can just poof into being from non-life by random forces, and then Darwinism that evolves into increasingly complex forms of life, and then you really arrive that humans are nothing special, and from there, extraterrestrial life is just an inevitable outcome of this worldview. So these widely accepted presuppositions really contribute to the widespread belief in intelligent extraterrestrial life. Now, a lot of people will just sort of accept this worldview without really understanding all these collateral assumptions that they're adopting as they go along. You might not think that just believing in aliens brings all this other baggage, but the Astrobiology project really does have all these assumptions behind it, and they are worth examining because many of them are extremely tenuous. Now, here's a report from May 21st, 2014. Scientists from SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, appeared before the U.S. Congress asking for funding, and they claimed it would just be absolutely bizarre if we are alone, and asked for continued funding to detect extraterrestrial life. But are these assumptions behind that claim really sound? I would like to talk about the rare earth hypothesis. Now, life is much more likely a rare commodity than commonly assumed by these scientists. Now, in their book, Rare Earth, Why Complex Life is Uncommon in the Universe, Peter Ward, a geologist and paleontologist, and Donald Brownlee, an astronomer and astrobiologist, argue that the emergence of complex life requires a host of fortuitous circumstances not accounted for by most astrobiologists. And I think it's important to recognize that these guys are not Christians, they're not intelligent design proponents. These are hard-nosed scientists working at major university science departments, and this is just their honest appraisal of the evidence. And I think that once you understand what's involved in the Earth, in the emergence of intelligent life, these astrobiological assumptions are very simplistic. Now, point one that they make argues that much of the known universe, including large parts of our own galaxy, are called dead zones. They can't support complex life. So for a planet to host intelligent life, it has to be at the right location in the right kind of galaxy. The second point they make is the aforementioned Goldilocks zone that we already talked about, where a planet needs to be within an Earth-comparable distance from its sun, so it's not too hot, not too cold, it can have liquid water. Now, third, a life-supporting system must be structured more or less like our solar system, with a small rocky inner planets and outer gas giants. If you think about it, without massive Jupiter out there, our planet would be bombarded by asteroids and space debris. A huge gravitational force like Jupiter attracts a lot of the trash that comes into our solar system and absolutely protects us. Without that, we probably would have been wiped out thousands of years ago. Now, fourth, it really needs stable orbits. Now, for life to exist, you need a stable climate, you need stable temperatures and tides and things of that nature that you can depend on. Without a stable orbit, then none of these things are possible. And our solar system reflects an optimal design. All the planets really orbit in a stable manner. Fifth, a large planet's immense gravity is problematic for life. And so a small one would be not have enough gravity to hold an atmosphere in. So the Earth's size is ideal. So you really have to have a planet of a particular size. The sixth point, it speaks to our moon and how our moon is somewhat of a freak because of its large size and its comparison to the Earth. Now, the moon's gravity actually stabilizes our planet's tilt, giving us the seasons. And without the moon, the variation would be chaotic, making complex life on land impossible. Also, the moon affects the ocean tides, and without it, they would only be about half of what they are now, effectively excluding tidal pools that are rich with life. Now, finally, the moon acts also as a protective shield. And I think just one look at the moon, you see all those craters all over it. It's really been our protector. Most of the debris that comes near the Earth actually hits our moon. And I think that's evident from its crater-pocked surface. 7. Now, this is one that most people would never think of, but it's probably the most important one on the list. Plate tectonics. Now, that's really a fancy term for the movement of the planetary crust across the surface of the Earth. Now, recently I was in California, and you can just see, big crust of the Earth sticking up out of the ground near the San Andreas Fault. Well, believe it or not, these things are necessary for intelligent life to exist. It's essential for recycling carbon. providing nutrients, and really maintaining our atmosphere. Now, the rare Earth hypothesis argues that this really could be the decisive factor. And the thing that's really interesting is we know of no other planet that has plate tectonics like the Earth. None of the ones in our solar system have anything close. So it really does seem that our planet is quite special indeed. Now, the last assumption is really abiogenesis, and evolution. And this is the idea that life comes into being from non-life. And this is truly a mystery to science. In fact, the world's most famous atheist, Richard Dawkins, wrote an essay called Climbing Mount Improbable. Now, he wrote, quote, "As far as we know, it may have happened only once on one planet out of a billion planets in the universe. Of course, many people think that it actually happened on lots of planets, but we have evidence that it happened on one planet after a lapse of 500 million to 1 billion years. So the sort of lucky event we are looking at could be so widely improbable that the chances of it happening somewhere in the universe could be as low as 1 in a billion in any 1 year." Interestingly, Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize-winning co-discoverer of the double helix structure of DNA, acknowledged, "An honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going." So that's quite an astounding admission from two famous atheistic biologists. And this really led Crick to propose what is known as directed panspermia. So in 1973, Crick and Orgel proposed directed panspermia, and this is the idea that suggested that, quote, "Life started on Earth as a result of an infection by a microorganism sent here deliberately by a technological society on another planet by means of a special long-range unmanned spaceship," end quote. So it's important to note that Crick and Orgel really were driven to this conclusion by just the astronomical unlikeliness of abiogenesis. They really just can't come up with any way to get life started, to get the whole Darwinian project started. You have to have life. You have to have reproducing life. And because they just don't have anything really going for them to explain how life emerged, they absolutely propose to just push it out into the universe and make an argument that perhaps aliens seeded life on Earth. Now, it might be astounding to you, but in these scientific circles, this idea is really gaining a lot of traction, especially in popular parlance. Science fiction authors and the entertainment industry have been promoting it for decades. Now, here's some films. Mission to Mars came out around the year 2000. It absolutely promoted this idea that the Martians basically seeded life on Earth, and for centuries we've been looking for the origin of life on Earth. We've been looking on the wrong planet, was the promotional spiel. So then we had Knowing in 2009, starring Nicolas Cage. In that movie, aliens not only started life on Earth, they come back and rapture selected persons right before a great cataclysm at the end. Another interesting correlation to biblical prophecy. Prometheus, that came out in 2012. At the beginning of the film, you see this alien diving into the ocean and just kind of seeding all this life. And the promotional line for the film was, "The search for our beginning could lead to our end." Boom, boom, boom. So Hollywood has really promoted the idea of panspermia. Now, really interesting again, in the movie Expelled, Oxford zoologist, outspoken atheist Richard Dawkins made an appeal to directed panspermia in the movie when he was asked about the origin of life by Ben Stein. Now, sometimes intelligent design critics will claim that ideas are making a God of the gaps argument by inserting God into the gaps of scientific knowledge. Well, it's quite interesting that when Dawkins was cornered on the origin of life, he proposed that perhaps aliens did it, making an aliens of the gaps argument.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
Well,
but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Now here's a quote from one of my mentors, Dr. Michael Heiser, who was actually the adjunct professor I had for Old Testament when I was in seminary. Now, speaking to the subject of panspermia, Heiser explains, quote, "It paves the way for a true merging of science and religion. It will be the paradigm that allows the atheist to tolerate religion and allows literalist Bible readers, the Eastern Buddhist, and the pagan to simultaneously parse the new science the same way. This might, in turn, be useful fodder for a global religion," end quote. Now, interestingly, an impetus toward globalism is one of the reasons for the UFO taboo cited by political scientists Dr. Alexander Wendt and Raymond Duval in their groundbreaking essay, Sovereignty.